The first thing he felt was the stickiness. A strange, tacky residue on the pad of his right thumb, an unwelcome sensation in the familiar quiet of his bedroom. Elias Vance opened his eyes. The morning sun, a loyal friend, was already streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, silent witness. He blinked, the sleep clearing from his mind, but the odd feeling on his thumb remained. He lifted his hand into the light, turning it over. There, stark against the wrinkled, calloused skin of his thumb, was a smear of black ink. It was profound and dark, a blot on the landscape of his flesh, a foreign object in his personal territory. A cold, quiet dread began to seep into the room, more chilling than the morning air. It wasn't the sharp dread of imminent danger, the kind he had known in another life, a lifetime ago. This was a slow, creeping horror, a violation of a different kind. He sat up, the old wood of the bed frame groaning in protest, a sound as familiar to him as his own breathing. He looked around the room, a space that was more museum than bedroom, a museum to a life lived with Martha. Her faded armchair in the corner, a book still resting on its arm, her silver-backed brush on the dresser, and on the nightstand, beside his simple alarm clock, the framed photograph of her, smiling, her eyes full of a light that had long since been extinguished. The ink on his thumb felt like a desecration of that memory. It was an intrusion, a theft committed not in the clamor of a break-in, but in the sacred silence of his sleep. He didn't need to ask how it got there. He knew. The whispers he'd been hearing for weeks, the sidelong glances from his son, Jacob, and Jacob's wife, Sarah. Their talk of equity and assets and moving on. It all coalesced into a single, ugly truth. They had done this. They had used him, his own flesh, his own identity, while he was defenseless in the dark. A wave of profound weariness washed over him, a fatigue that went deeper than his bones. Welcome to Hidden Valor, the one place where stories of forgotten honor find their voice. In a world that screams for attention, that measures a person's worth by the noise they make and the wealth they display, we search for the silent giants, the quiet heroes who walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight. We believe that true strength isn't loud, it's enduring. If you believe that too, if you believe in the power of a life lived with quiet dignity, then subscribe to our channel and join a community that honors the unseen. Now, return with us to a quiet bedroom, where a good man has just woken up to the ultimate betrayal. Elias looked at his ink-stained thumb and then back at Martha's picture. He hadn't been able to protect this house, her house, the sanctuary they had built with their own hands. He could hear them downstairs now. Jacob's booming, confident voice, Sarah's high-pitched laughter. They were celebrating. They were toasting their victory, oblivious or perhaps indifferent, to the fact that their triumph was built upon the rubble of his trust. He didn't feel anger, not the hot, red rage he was once capable of. Instead, a deep, hollow sadness settled in his chest, heavy as a shroud. He slowly swung his legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards, his old friends, creaked a mournful welcome. He stood, his body a map of old injuries and long miles, and walked to the window. He looked out at the old oak tree in the front yard, the one he and Martha had planted as a sapling the day they moved in. Its branches reached towards the sky, strong and unwavering. It had roots. It knew where it belonged. He, on the other hand, was suddenly adrift. He was a ghost in his own home, a home that, he now understood, was no longer his. The ink was the proof. It was the signature on a contract he had never agreed to, a final, damning period on the last chapter of his life in this place. The quiet hero never asks for a fight, but when betrayal comes from within his own walls, the silence itself becomes a battleground. Elias Vance's life was a study in quiet routine, a liturgy of small, meaningful actions that held the chaos of memory at bay. Each morning began not with the jarring buzz of an alarm, but with the gentle shift of light in his room. He would rise and dress in the same muted colors, gray, beige, olive green, clothes that were worn soft with time, that asked for no attention. Downstairs, in the kitchen that Martha had designed, he would perform the ritual of coffee. The precise measurement of the grounds, the slow pour of the hot water, the specific way he held the worn ceramic mug that fit his hand perfectly. These were not habits. They were anchors. They kept him grounded in the present while honoring the past. After coffee, he would walk the property. Not a stroll, but a patrol. He would check the fence line, his gait steady despite the slight limp in his left leg, a souvenir from a place whose name was now just a whisper in history books. He'd spend an hour in the garden, tending to the rose bush Martha had planted. He pruned its branches with the focused precision of a surgeon, his large, scarred hands surprisingly gentle as they cleared away the dead wood to make way for new life. It was here, in the garden, that the totem of his other life was sometimes visible. As he reached to tie a climbing stem, the sleeve of his old work shirt would ride up his forearm, revealing a faded, intricate tattoo just above the wrist. It was a blur of wings and a downward-pointing dagger, its lines so softened by time and sun that it was almost invisible, a ghost of an insignia on his skin. He never looked at it. He didn't need to. He felt its presence, a permanent mark of a covenant he had made long ago. His days were spent in solitude, but he was not lonely. He had his books, his garden, and the constant, comforting presence of the house itself. The house was alive with memories. The creak of the third step on the staircase was Martha coming down for breakfast. The way the afternoon light hit the living room floor was the memory of Jacob as a toddler, chasing sunbeams. He lived quietly, asked for nothing, and bothered no one. This quiet, however, was a source of profound irritation for his son and daughter-in-law. Jacob and Sarah had moved in a year after Martha's passing, under the guise of taking care of him. In reality, they saw him as a live-in groundskeeper for the appreciating asset they intended to inherit. Their presence was a constant, low-level hum of discord. "Dad, are you really going to wear that old shirt to the store? People will think we don't look after you," Sarah would say, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "Dad, this whole house is a fire hazard. All this old wood. We should really think about selling and getting you into a nice, modern condo," Jacob would add, his eyes scanning the hand-carved ceiling beams not with admiration, but with the cold calculation of a developer. They spoke about him in the third person, even when he was in the same room. "He just sits there all day. It's not healthy. He doesn't even watch the new television we bought him." Their world was one of noise, of acquisition, of constant upgrades. His was a world of preservation, of memory, of quiet honor. The two could not coexist. They saw his stoicism not as strength, but as senility. They mistook his silence for weakness. They looked at his calloused hands and saw a laborer, not a warrior. They saw the limp and assumed frailty, not sacrifice. They were blind to the man who lived before them, seeing only the obstacle that stood between them and the life they felt they deserved. And so, in their profound and arrogant ignorance, they hatched their plan. A plan that culminated in a smear of black ink on a sleeping man's thumb. From their perspective, it was a perfectly logical, even compassionate act. Jacob and Sarah sat at their gleaming granite countertop, sipping expensive wine, the blueprints for their future spread out before them. They were not evil people, not in their own minds. They were practical. They were modern. They were simply taking control of a situation that, to them, had spiraled into absurdity. The house, this rambling, old-fashioned structure on a large plot of land, was becoming a gold mine. The city was expanding, and developers were sniffing around the neighborhood, offering sums that made Jacob's head spin. To him, his father's quiet life in the house was not a beautiful, sentimental thing. It was the equivalent of keeping a winning lottery ticket in a dusty old book and never cashing it. "He doesn't even use half the rooms," Jacob said, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. "It's a waste, Sarah, a complete and utter waste. The property taxes alone are criminal." Sarah, ever his echo, nodded in agreement, her eyes fixed on a brochure for a luxury condominium complex. "And think of the upkeep. This place is falling apart. We're doing him a favor, really. A nice, clean apartment with a panic button and organized social activities. Is what he needs." He just can't see it. They had built a fortress of rationalization around their greed. They told themselves they were protectors, stewards of his well-being. The legal paperwork, the deed transfer, the power of attorney, they had tricked him into signing months earlier by burying it in a stack of routine medical forms. It was all just a means to an end that was, in their view, best for everyone. The final, sordid detail of using his fingerprint while he slept was a masterstroke of what they saw as gentle coercion. A confrontation would be messy, emotional. He might get stubborn. This way it was just done. A clean, quiet solution. 100 miles away, in a sterile, fluorescent-lit office, a young paralegal named Maya sifted through a mountain of files. Her job was a relentless procession of other people's lives reduced to paper. Divorces, bankruptcies, and property transfers. The Vance file landed on her desk with a dull thud. It seemed simple enough. An intrafamily transfer. Son taking ownership of the father's property. Everything was in order. The power of attorney was signed and notarized. The new deed was drafted correctly. And there, in the signature box for Elias Vance, was the official, legally binding thumbprint, attested to by Jacob as his father's designated agent. It was all cold, clinical, and correct. But Maya felt a small, persistent snag in her conscience. She was young, but she was observant. She'd been present at the one brief meeting where Elias had been brought in to review the final documents. A meeting orchestrated by Jacob to create a veneer of consent. Elias had said nothing. He had just sat there, a figure of immense stillness in the bustling law office. Maya had watched him, noting the quiet dignity that seemed so out of place. While Jacob and the senior partner chattered on, Elias had simply looked at the paper. Then, with a pen given to him, he'd made a small, almost imperceptible mark next to the signature box before Jacob whisked the document away. It wasn't a signature, just a tiny, sharp symbol. A spade, like from a deck of cards, but stylized, sharp, and angular. At the time, Maya had dismissed it as a doodle, the absent-minded mark of an old man. But now, looking at the finalized, cold document, the memory of that small, defiant mark bothered her. It felt like a message in a bottle, a whisper of protest that no one else had heard. On a whim, she typed a description of the symbol into an obscure search engine on her computer. Sharp spade symbol military. The results were sparse, leading her down a rabbit hole of veteran forums and cryptic military slang. It was nothing concrete, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt. The Vance file was legally perfect, but something about it felt morally bankrupt. The confrontation, when it came, was not a storm, but a quiet, chilling frost. Jacob and Sarah chose a Sunday afternoon, a time they associated with family and good news, to deliver their verdict. They sat their father down in the living room, the room where he had taught Jacob to read, the room where Martha had breathed her last. They presented it as a celebration, a new chapter. Sarah had even baked a cake. "Dad, we have some wonderful news," Jacob began, his voice radiating a false, booming bonhomie. He placed a leather-bound folder on the coffee table between them. "We've taken care of everything. You don't have to worry about this big, drafty old house anymore." He opened the folder with a flourish, revealing the deed of transfer. "We've secured a beautiful, brand-new apartment for you downtown. All the amenities. And the best part is, selling this place will set you up for life. You'll be comfortable. We'll be comfortable. It's a win-win." Sarah chimed in, cutting a large slice of cake. "It's all signed and sealed, Dad. All legal. We used your fingerprint just like you wanted so you wouldn't have to strain your hand. See? We're always thinking of you." Elias looked from their smiling, expectant faces to the document on the table. He saw the official seals, the typed legal jargon, the cold finality of it all. And there, in the box marked Grantor, was the inky, smudged oval of his own thumbprint. A part of him stolen and used against him. He felt his own pulse, a slow, steady beat in his ears, a rhythm he had learned to trust in the most chaotic moments of his life. He did not look at the cake. He did not look at the brochure for the new apartment. He looked at the document. He remembered the small, sharp spade he had drawn beside that box in the lawyer's office, a symbol they had not even noticed. It was a mark of defiance, a quiet signal to anyone who knew the language. He raised his eyes and looked directly at his son. He said nothing. The silence in the room grew, stretching out, becoming a tangible thing. It absorbed their cheerful chatter, their self-congratulatory smiles. It was a profound, unnerving silence, filled with the weight of unspoken history, of broken promises. Jacob's smile began to falter. He shifted in his seat, suddenly uncomfortable under his father's unwavering gaze. "Well, say something, Dad. This is good news." Elias remained silent. His eyes, clear and steady, held a depth of disappointment that was more piercing than any accusation. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pleading. He was simply bearing witness to his son's character, and in his silence, he was passing judgment. Sarah's cheerful facade cracked. "For goodness sake, Elias, stop being so dramatic. We did this for you. Can't you see that? Why do you have to be so difficult?" But Elias wasn't being difficult. He was being himself. A man who had faced down enemies with guns and bombs, who had survived things Jacob couldn't even imagine, was now facing a different kind of enemy. An enemy born of his own blood, armed with greed and a piece of paper. And he met it the only way he knew how, with a quiet, unbreakable dignity. He slowly stood up, his joints protesting, and without a word he turned and walked out of the room, leaving his son and daughter-in-law alone with their cake, their legal documents, and the vast, echoing emptiness of their victory. The days that followed were an exercise in calculated cruelty. The quiet frost of the initial confrontation gave way to a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to make Elias feel like a stranger in his own home. The escalation was swift and brutal. Jacob and Sarah, stung by his silent rebuke, abandoned all pretense of compassion. Their mission was now to erase him from the house, to pack away his existence box by box. The cardboard boxes arrived like an invading army, stacked high in the hallway. They started in the spare rooms, but soon they were in his space, their hands on his life. Sarah, with a grim sense of purpose, would hold up an object and declare its fate. "This old clock? Junk. These books? They smell musty. Goodwill. Honestly, Dad, who keeps a box of old photographs? That's what digital clouds are for." Each discarded item was a small assassination of a memory. The worn copy of Leaves of Grass that Martha used to read to him. The small, hand-carved bird he had made for Jacob on his 5th birthday. The collection of sea glass they had gathered on their last trip to the coast. He would watch them, his face an impassive mask, as they wrapped his life in newspaper and sealed it away with packing tape. He didn't intervene. He didn't argue. To do so would be to grant them a power over his emotions that he refused to yield. His silence was his armor. His stillness was his strength. They mistook it for surrender. One afternoon, the real estate agent arrived. He was a young man named Todd, dressed in a suit that was too tight and a smile that was too wide. He strode through the house with an air of proprietary confidence, Jacob and Sarah trailing behind him like eager acolytes. He spoke in a rapid-fire burst of industry jargon, his voice echoing in the increasingly empty rooms. "Great bones here, great bones. We'll need to gut the kitchen, obviously. Open up this wall to create flow. The paneling has to go. It's dated. We'll stage it with some modern, minimalist furniture to appeal to the younger demographic." He never once made eye contact with Elias, who sat on the porch steps, watching the performance. To Todd, Elias was not a person. He was a feature of the property that needed to be removed before closing, like an old furnace or a termite infestation. Meanwhile, in her quiet office, Maya the paralegal couldn't let the Vance file go. The image of the old man's quiet dignity and the strange, sharp spade symbol he had drawn haunted her. Felt like an unsolved puzzle. She spent her lunch break digging deeper, falling further down the online rabbit hole. She found it. A single, cryptic post on a heavily encrypted message board for special operations veterans. The post was from years ago. It read, "The ghost of Mogadishu is a myth, but we who were there know the truth. When you saw the spade, you knew you were safe. Underneath it, a reply, only the ghosts know the spade, and they never leave a man behind. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The ghost, a spade, couldn't be a coincidence. She looked at the copy of the Vance deed on her desk, at the cold, legal thumbprint. Then she thought of the old man's steady gaze, his absolute stillness in the face of his son's betrayal. She was just a paralegal. She was in no position to challenge a senior partner or a client. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her gut, that a terrible injustice was being done. She picked up her phone and began to search for a name. Any name, associated with Operation Silent Spade. A phrase she'd seen linked to the forum. She had to do something. The quiet hero was being erased, and she, a stranger, was now the unlikely keeper of his silent scream for help. The last night fell like a curtain on a play that had run its course. The house was no longer a home. It was a warehouse of memories, a hollow shell filled with cardboard boxes and the ghosts of laughter. Each box was a tombstone marking a part of his life that was now declared dead and buried. Jacob and Sarah were out, a celebratory dinner at a fancy downtown restaurant, toasting to their new life, the one they had purchased with a single, stolen thumbprint. Elias was alone, a king in a conquered castle, surveying the ruins of his reign. He walked through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing in the silence. This was not the comfortable silence of solitude he had known for years. It was the sterile silence of abandonment. He ran his hand along the wall in the hallway, his fingers finding the series of small notches in the wood. Jacob's height, measured every year on his birthday, from the small boy who barely reached his father's knee to the tall young man who had once looked up to him. He stood in the kitchen and could almost smell the ghost of Martha's baking, could almost hear her humming a tune as she worked. He walked into the living room and saw the empty space where her armchair used to be, a void that was now both physical and metaphorical. This slow, final patrol was a litany of goodbyes. Goodbye to the morning light in the kitchen. Goodbye to the creak of the third stair. Goodbye to the view of the old oak tree from the bedroom window. He felt a profound sense of loss, not for the wood and nails of the structure, but for the sanctuary it represented, the vessel that had held the most precious parts of his life. He ended his tour on the front porch, settling into his old rocking chair. The night was clear, the sky a vast, dark canvas pricked with the cold, distant light of stars. He had looked at these same stars from deserts and jungles, from the bellies of helicopters and the lonely watchtowers of forgotten outposts. They had been his constant companions in a life of upheaval. They demanded nothing. They simply were. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. A single, tarnished medal. It wasn't one of the important ones, not the ones that came with citations and ceremonies, most of which he had quietly refused. This one was simpler, a service medal from early in his career. He had kept it because Martha had been so proud when he received it. She had polished it every week. Now, its inscription was worn almost smooth from the touch of his own thumb over the years. He held it in his palm, its weight a small, solid comfort in a world that had become flimsy and false. He was not defeated. He was not broken. He had endured far worse than the petty greed of a lost son. He had faced true evil, had walked through the valley of the shadow of death and emerged, scarred but whole. This was just another kind of battle, one fought not with weapons, but with resolve. He wasn't fighting for the house anymore. He was fighting for the man Martha had loved, the father Jacob had forgotten. He was fighting for his honor, a thing that could not be packed in a box or signed away. He closed his eyes, the cool night air on his face, and waited for the dawn. The morning arrived with a brutal, clinical brightness. The sun, which had for so long been a gentle friend, now seemed harsh and accusatory, illuminating every speck of dust, every empty space. The sound that broke the morning quiet was the groan and hiss of a large moving truck backing into the driveway, its diesel engine a vulgar intrusion into the peaceful dawn. Jacob was already outside, a clipboard in hand, barking orders at the two movers with the unearned authority of a man playing a role. He was a general in a war of his own making, directing the final assault. Careful with that. It's going to storage, not the dump. The leather sofa goes first. Let's be efficient, people. Sarah was on her phone, pacing the lawn, her voice a sharp counterpoint to the rumble of the truck. Yes, the chevron pattern for the backsplash. And I want the brushed nickel fixtures, not the chrome. No, the budget is firm. We just came into some equity. They were so absorbed in their victory, they barely noticed Elias as he emerged from the house for the last time. He carried a single, small cardboard box, held in both hands. He walked to the front porch steps and sat down, placing the box carefully at his feet. He was a statue of stillness in the midst of frantic activity. He watched the movers, two young men with weary faces, begin to carry the pieces of his life out of the house. He watched his son directing traffic, a smug smile on his face. Then came a new sound. It wasn't the roar of a truck or the chatter of a phone call. It was a low, powerful hum, a sound of synchronized, disciplined power. 3 black SUVs, gleaming and immaculate, turned into the driveway, their movements precise and coordinated. They didn't park haphazardly. They formed a perfect, staggered line, blocking the moving truck in. The hum of their engines idled, a deep thrum that vibrated in the air. The world seemed to slow down. The movers stopped, their hands frozen on a piece of furniture. Jacob lowered his clipboard, his face a mask of annoyance and confusion. Sarah ended her call, her brow furrowed. The doors of the SUVs opened in perfect unison. 6 men emerged. The first was a man who seemed to carry his own atmosphere of authority. He was in his late 60s, ramrod straight, wearing the immaculate dress uniform of a 4-star general. His chest a brilliant constellation of medals and ribbons that glittered in the sun. The other 5 men were of a similar age, dressed in dark, civilian clothes, but they moved with a discipline and economy of motion that spoke of a lifetime of training. They were stone-faced, their eyes scanning the scene with a cold, professional assessment. They ignored the movers. They ignored Sarah. They ignored Jacob. Their focus was singular. They walked past the moving truck, their polished boots crunching on the gravel driveway with a rhythmic, intimidating cadence, and moved directly, unstoppably, towards the old man sitting on the porch steps. The power dynamic on the quiet suburban street shifted with the weight of a tectonic plate. The universe, which moments before had revolved around Jacob Vance and his real estate victory, suddenly found a new center of gravity. It was the old man on the porch. The 6 men formed a silent, protective semicircle around the steps, facing outward, a human wall between Elias and the world. The general, a man whose name was spoken with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon, walked up the 3 short steps of the porch. He did not tower over Elias. He did not offer a handshake. He did something that shattered the reality of everyone watching. General Marcus Hawthorne, commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, knelt. He went down on one knee on the dusty wood of the porch, bringing his decorated, authoritative presence level with the seated old man. The shock of the gesture was a physical blow. Jacob's mouth fell open. Sarah's phone slipped from her hand and fell silently onto the grass. The movers stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. The general looked at Elias, and in his eyes, there was no authority, only a profound, unwavering respect. "It's good to see you, Sergeant Major," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the sudden, absolute silence. Elias gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. Marcus. The use of the first name, so simple, so familiar, was another shockwave. The general smiled, a small, sad smile. He stood, his back still to Jacob, and took a moment to compose himself. Then he turned, and his gaze fell upon Jacob Vance for the first time. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glacial coldness. "You must be Jacob Vance," he said. It was not a question. "I am General Hawthorne. I understand you believe you are the owner of this property." Jacob, flustered, tried to regain his footing. Yes, it's all legal. The paperwork is filed. This is my house." General Hawthorne took a step forward, and Jacob flinched. "This is not a house," the general said, his voice now a blade of steel. "This is a monument. It is a sanctuary that was paid for with a currency your mind cannot comprehend. It was paid for with blood, with sacrifice, and with the honor of a man you have the unmitigated gall to call Dad. You think you know him? You see an old man. I see a legend. Let me tell you who your father is." The monologue began. It was not a speech. It was a declassification. In the autumn of 1993, a task force of our nation's finest was trapped in a city of fire and death. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and taking heavy casualties. All communication was lost. We were about to write them off as a total loss. On-screen text: Mogadishu, Somalia. Operation Gothic Serpent. Then, a two-man sniper team, operating outside the official perimeter, disobeyed a direct order to retreat. They moved toward the fight. That team was your father and a man he trained. For 16 hours, they held back an enemy force of hundreds, providing cover for the extraction of wounded rangers. He was wounded 3 times and never fell back. We called him the Ghost. He had no call sign, no official record of being there. He was just a whisper, a ghost who saved an entire company. On-screen text: Distinguished Service Cross. Refused. In the mountains of Afghanistan, he walked for 3 days through enemy territory, carrying a wounded teammate on his back, with no food and a single magazine of ammunition. On-screen text: Silver Star, X2. Bronze Star with Valor, X4. Purple Heart, X6. He is the man they sent in when missions went wrong. He is the architect of half the special tactics the SEALs and Delta Force use to this day. He doesn't have a file, son. He is the file. A file so secret that if it were ever made public, it would rewrite history. He asked for nothing. No medals. No recognition. No parades. He only asked to come home to his wife, to this house, and to live in peace. A peace you have tried to steal from him with a lawyer and a smudge of ink. One of the other men, his face a roadmap of scars, stepped forward and pointed to the faded tattoo on Elias's forearm. "We all carry the mark," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He gave it to us. It means we are family. It means we never, ever leave one of our own behind." The general's words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the crushing weight of shame. The bright, sunny morning now felt like a courtroom, and Jacob and Sarah Vance were in the dock, convicted of a crime far greater than fraud. They were guilty of a profound, soul-deep ignorance. The color drained from Jacob's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. His smug confidence collapsed inward, imploding like a dying star. He looked from the towering, decorated general to the quiet, stooped figure of his father, and for the first time in his life, he saw him. He saw not the frail, senile old man he had constructed in his mind, but a giant, a figure of mythic proportions whose shadow he had lived in his entire life without ever noticing. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. A lifetime of condescension, of petty grievances, of disrespect, flashed before his eyes, each memory now searing him with shame. Sarah stood frozen on the lawn, her face a grotesque mask of shock and horror. The world of brushed nickel fixtures and chevron backsplashes had evaporated, replaced by a terrifying new reality. The man whose things she had casually labeled as junk was a hero, a titan, a man revered by other titans. Her casual cruelty, her dismissive remarks, now replayed in her mind as acts of unspeakable sacrilege. She felt a desperate, primal urge to be invisible, to shrink away until she ceased to exist. The real estate agent, Todd, had been slowly backing away since the general's monologue began. He was now halfway to his car, his face pale, his slicked-back hair somehow disheveled. He looked at Elias with a new, terrified awe, as if he had just discovered the quiet groundskeeper was in fact a slumbering dragon. The two movers had long since abandoned their work. They stood by their truck, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and reverence. They looked at Elias not as a client, but as something from a movie, a legend made flesh. The quiet street had become a stage, and they were witnesses to a moment of profound, biblical justice. General Hawthorne let the silence stretch, allowing the full impact of the revelation to settle. Then one of his men, a man with the quiet, capable air of a lawyer who had seen much more than courtrooms, stepped forward. He held a crisp, official-looking document. He addressed Jacob directly, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "I represent the Patriots' Grace Foundation," he stated, "an organization founded by private, grateful citizens to honor and protect national treasures like Sergeant Major Vance. The mortgage on this property, which you illicitly used your father's identity to leverage, has been purchased in full from the bank. The foundation is now the sole legal owner of this house and the surrounding land. The deed you hold, Mr. Vance, is null and void." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This property will be preserved. It will be maintained as a place of quiet dignity, available to the Sergeant Major for as long as he wishes. You and your wife will vacate the premises. You have 10 minutes to remove your personal vehicle and any effects you can carry by hand. A security detail will be posted within the hour." The finality of it was absolute. The power dynamic had not just been shifted. It had been annihilated and rebuilt from the ground up. The world had been turned upside down, and now it righted itself with a quiet, solemn finality. Elias Vance slowly, deliberately, pushed himself to his feet. The joints that had protested his every movement for years seemed to find a new strength, a new purpose. He stood, not as tall as the general, not as broad as the men of his old team, but he possessed a gravity that held them all in orbit. He looked at his son. He saw the broken man standing in the driveway, the ruins of his arrogance scattered around him like rubble. In Elias's eyes, there was no triumph, no "I told you so." There was only a vast, deep, and sorrowful pity. A pity for a son who had been given a legacy of honor and had tried to trade it for square footage. He did not speak a single word. A word would have been too small, too insufficient for the chasm that now lay between them. The judgment had been rendered not by him, but by the life he had lived. He turned his back on his son and faced General Hawthorne. He gave a short, simple nod, a gesture of understanding and gratitude that passed between two old soldiers. The general returned the nod, his eyes communicating a message of unwavering loyalty. "We have you, brother. You are home." Elias then bent down and picked up his single, small cardboard box. It contained the few things that truly mattered: the framed photograph of his smiling Martha, the worn copy of Leaves of Grass, and the single, tarnished medal that she had once polished with such love. These were the totems of his true life, the one he had fought to come home to. With his box held securely in his hands, he walked down the porch steps. His old team, his brothers in arms, fell in around him, creating a silent, moving phalanx of protection. They guided him to the lead SUV, one of them opening the rear door for him. He got in without a backward glance. The doors of the SUVs closed with a solid, unified thud. The engines hummed to life, and the convoy pulled out of the driveway as quietly and efficiently as it had arrived, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. Jacob and Sarah were left standing alone in the driveway of a house that was no longer theirs, surrounded by the cardboard boxes of a life they had tried to steal and the profound emptiness of their choices. The narrator's voice returns, calm and reflective. "Honor, you see, is not a house, cannot be bought, sold, or stolen. It is not found in a legal document or a bank account, cannot be signed away with a thumbprint in the dark. It is a light, a quiet, steady light that a person carries within. Some are born with it, some earn it in the crucible of fire, but it can only be lost in one way, by willingly choosing to extinguish it. The quiet heroes of this world ask for nothing, but they remind us of everything that truly matters. What is the true measure of a person? What is the legacy you hope to leave behind? Let us know your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. For more inspiration, for more tales of hidden valor that remind us to look past the surface and see the hero within, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because honor is quiet, and you have to be listening to hear it.